just do this. And this is kind of my way of forgetting my surroundings and kind of distracting myself and focusing on a central point so that I can kind of pick up on subtle impressions that.
There's a video going around claiming Tyler Henry has finally opened up about the most evil person he's ever read for someone from a disturbing session back in 2017 that he's allegedly kept quiet about for years. Sounds huge, right? But before we get carried away, let's actually look at what's been confirmed, what's pure speculation, and what we genuinely don't know. Because the real story here might be more interesting than the headline. Who is Tyler Henry? If you're not familiar, Tyler Henry is the guy behind Hollywood Medium, Life After Death with Tyler Henry, and most recently Live from the Other Side. Henry was born in January 1996 and didn't discover his abilities until around age 10, when he says he had a premonition about his grandmother's death. From there, he started doing readings for classmates and teachers in high school, charging around $40 a session, and even taught grieving classes at a local shop before he'd graduated. He landed his first major TV show, Hollywood Medium, at just 19 years old. From there, his career exploded. He's read for an enormous range of celebrities over the years: Megan Fox, Jaleel White, The Kardashians, Snooki, Jodie Sweetin, Lil' Kim, and many more. His Netflix shows have kept him in the spotlight well into the 2020s, and by 2024 he reportedly had roughly 700,000 people on a waiting list for a reading. He's also been candid about how isolating his gift was growing up. He's described feeling socially cut off from peers in middle and high school because of how different he was, and he's talked about coming from a conservative Christian community where some people viewed his abilities as a gift and others viewed them as something far more sinister. So this is someone with a long, well-documented public career and a fairly open history of talking about the harder parts of his life. Given all of that, does a sudden, vague claim about a secretly evil client in 2017 actually fit the pattern of how he's talked about his work, or does it stand out as something different? What the video actually claims. The video making the rounds claims Tyler had a disturbing reading back in 2017 with someone he's described, allegedly, as one of the most unsettling people he's ever sat across from. According to the video's framing, he's kept the details quiet for years before now finally addressing it. Here's the important caveat: that's what the video says. It is, right now, the single source for this entire story. There's no name attached to the claim, no independent confirmation, and no second outlet reporting on it separately. That doesn't automatically mean it's false, but it does mean we should treat it the way we'd treat any unverified claim, which is carefully. The tense readings we actually know about. Here's where it gets interesting, because Tyler genuinely has talked about uncomfortable sessions before, just not in the dramatic most evil person framing. The most well-documented example is his reading with Boy George. The Culture Club frontman went in openly skeptical, reportedly convinced by his manager Paul Kemsley to even show up in the first place. Things got tense enough that Kemsley, who'd been watching from another room, came out to encourage his client to be more open to the process. Boy George eventually softened by the end of the session, telling cameras afterward that he thought Tyler had a real gift and that he'd be open to seeing him again. So that's a real, sourced example of friction during a session, but it ends with the guest coming around, not with anyone being labeled evil or unsettling. There's also the well-known case of his 2016 reading with Matt Lauer on Today. Henry gave Lauer a deeply personal reading touching on his late father and his maternal grandfather. The timing aged badly. The following year, Lauer was fired from the network after an anonymous employee filed a sexual misconduct complaint against him, which opened the door to further allegations. That's not Tyler describing someone as evil during the session itself, it's more that the reading looked very different in hindsight once unrelated allegations against Lauer
flooded
became
the comments pointing out that he hadn't seen it coming. So we do have real, sourced examples of awkward or tense readings, and even one where a reading aged poorly once unrelated information came out later. The question is whether any of them are actually connected to this 2017 most evil person claim, or whether that's a completely separate, unverified story being layered on top of a career that already has plenty of real drama in it. The readings that made him famous. It's worth zooming out here, because most of what's actually documented about Tyler's career is the opposite of unsettling. It's emotional, and often described by his clients as comforting. Snooki has been one of his most enthusiastic repeat clients. During her first reading, Henry passed along messages she said came from her late uncle, which left her in tears. She was impressed enough to bring him back for a reading with her entire extended family, a session so emotionally heavy that Henry himself reportedly broke down before it even started, describing a feeling of empathetic sadness he said wasn't his own. Jodie Swein, who has spoken openly about her history with addiction, had a reading where Henry relayed a message from her late grandmother expressing pride in her recovery. Swein later said it hit her in a deeply emotional spot, given how much her grandmother had supported her through difficult years. Then there's Ricky Lake, whose reading became one of the more talked about moments in recent memory. Following the devastating Los Angeles wildfires, Lake shared on Instagram that Henry had accurately described a fire connected to her months before it happened. It's worth noting, though, that according to coverage of the episode itself, Henry actually framed the fire in the past tense during the session and told Lake directly that he didn't see another fire coming when she asked, which makes the later online narrative around this reading a little more complicated than the headline version suggests. So across his career, the documented pattern really is mostly cheerful, cathartic, repeat customer energy. There's also the long-running thread with the Kardashian family. Henry first read for Khloe, Kim, and Kourtney on an episode of their reality show, connecting them with their late father, Robert Kardashian. That session went well enough that Kris Jenner and Kylie Jenner later appeared on his own show, and Khloe became a repeat client. In a later session with her, Henry warned about distance coming into a relationship, which fans connected after the fact to her breakup with Tristan Thompson. It's worth noting that's exactly the kind of vague but emotionally resonant prediction critics point to as a hallmark of cold reading. It's specific enough to feel meaningful in hindsight, but general enough to apply to a lot of relationships. Which raises the question again. If his typical client relationship looks like this, what would it actually take for one specific reading to stand out as uniquely dark? The skeptics and the fraud accusations. No conversation about Tyler Henry is complete without mentioning the very vocal group of people who think the whole thing is fake. This is well documented, and a real part of his public story, even if it has nothing to do with the most evil person claim specifically. Critics have long accused him of using cold reading techniques, tossing out vague statements designed to land emotionally with almost anyone, then letting the client fill in the specifics. Some accusers have gone further, suggesting that because his subjects are almost always famous, he or his production team could simply research them ahead of time, a practice sometimes called hot reading. One frequently cited example is his 2016 reading with a Today Show producer, where Henry referenced a man's unexpected heart attack and a tragedy involving another loved one, and the producer filled in the rest. His father had died of a heart attack, and his brother had died of a drug overdose. Critics pointed out afterward that the family connection involved was easy enough to find with a basic search. Henry's own executive producer has pushed back on accusations like this directly, stating that Henry is never told in advance who he's about to read, and that production deliberately limits how many crew members even know the guest's identity before the session starts. Skeptical organizations have weighed in too. A 2024 opinion piece in the Skeptical Inquirer specifically criticized his Netflix show Live from the Other Side, arguing that the format, meeting guests without any visible preparation, actually undermines claims of reliability rather than supporting them. A separate, frequently cited critical analysis published years earlier accused Henry of grief vampire behavior, the idea being that mediums profit by capitalizing on the emotional vulnerability of people who've lost someone. That earlier analysis actually has a name attached to it. Scientific skepticism activist Susan Jerbick published a formal critique of Henry's reading with Alan Thicke through the Center for Inquiry, arguing that flagging heart and blood pressure trouble wasn't a genuine prediction at all, since heart disease is statistically the leading cause of death for American men, meaning the odds were already in his favor. It's one of the more organized on-record pushbacks against Henry's specific claims, rather than just general online doubt. Around the same period, an episode of Hollywood Medium featured Dr. Drew running an on-camera mural scan to see what was actually happening in Henry's brain during a session, a rare attempt to test him under something closer to controlled conditions, though the segment stopped short of settling the debate either way. Even Henry himself has been fairly open that he's not infallible. He's told interviewers he aims to be accurate roughly 80% of the time, comparing himself to a basketball player who still misses free throws, but is recognized as talented anyway. He's also said publicly that he welcomes skepticism, drawing a distinction between healthy skepticism and outright cynicism, and has framed the discomfort some people feel about him as a natural reaction to something unfamiliar. There's also been ongoing skepticism around his Netflix shows specifically, with some critics online accusing the format of profiting off grief, going so far as to call it predatory toward genuinely vulnerable people. Henry, for his part, has consistently maintained that his intention is to help people, describing his ability almost as a compulsion rather than a choice. He said that if he tries to take time off, he starts to feel physically uneasy within a couple weeks. This matters for our story because it shows Henry's career has already weathered plenty of real, sourced controversy. Accusations of fraud, accusations of exploiting grief, plenty of skeptical commentary from both critics and the audiences he reads. None of that, however, lines up specifically with the evil client narrative currently circulating. It's a different kind of criticism entirely that SO given how much documented controversy already exists around his legitimacy. Why would this one specific, unnamed claim be the one that finally breaks through, especially with so little detail attached to it? His track record, hits and misses. Since accuracy is at the heart of every Tyler Henry controversy, it's worth actually walking through some of the documented cases, because the real record is a lot messier than either side of the debate usually admits. On the eerily accurate side, there's his reading with skateboarder Rob Dyrdek back in 2016. Dyrdek and his wife were convinced they were having a girl, but Henry told him directly that he'd end up being a father figure to a little boy, which turned out to be correct. There's also his reading with comedian Margaret Cho, where he predicted she'd write a book that would become a hit, even specifying a 2-month delay in its release, something Cho later confirmed happened exactly as described. And there's the case of Alan Thicke, who was told during a reading that heart and blood pressure issues ran in his family. Thicke died of an aortic dissection months later, which fans pointed to as proof of Henry's gift, though skeptics countered that heart disease is statistically the leading cause of death for American men, making it a fairly safe guess rather than a specific prediction. There's a similar dynamic in his episode with stunt performer Steve-O, who's described in the show's own framing as going in an outright skeptic and coming out convinced by the end of the session. It's a compelling TV moment, but worth flagging the same way as the Boy George episode. It's a documented on-camera reaction, not independently verified proof of accuracy, since we're relying on the show's own framing of how the segment played out. On the wrong side, there's a reading with Lil' Kim about Notorious B.I.G., where Henry suggested the rapper had a strong suspicion someone wanted him dead. A detail critics pointed out had already been publicly discussed for years and didn't add anything new to an unsolved case. There's also his 2016 comments about the presidential election, where, when asked about Donald Trump's chances, Henry said he wasn't worried, a response vague enough that outlets at the time noted it could be read multiple ways depending on which outcome actually happened. And then there's Kristen Chenoweth, whose reading became one of Henry's favorite examples of validation. He described drawing a piece of jewelry before even sitting down with her, and her family later confirmed it matched an actual piece that belonged to a deceased loved one. Henry himself doesn't pretend to bat 1,000. He's said in interviews that he doesn't think getting some readings wrong invalidates the ones he gets right, comparing it to how even great athletes have an off day without that erasing their overall talent. So with a documented track record that's genuinely mixed, some startlingly specific hits, some vague misses, and plenty of room for interpretation in between, does that make a sudden, headline-ready claim about one uniquely evil client more or less believable? One thing that is well documented is how Tyler talks about discretion with celebrity clients. In an interview, he explained that when he's reading someone famous, he has to be conscious that they have a public image to maintain. Information that might be fine to say out loud for an average person isn't always something a celebrity wants made public. So he said directly that he tailors what he shares based on what a client wants kept private. That's a real on-record explanation for why he might be cagey about specific clients or specific sessions. It doesn't confirm anything about a most evil person, but it does explain why, in general, he wouldn't go into detail naming names or describing a client unfavorably on camera. That's just baked into how he's described his own process for years, long before this particular rumor showed up online. So if discretion is just part of how he normally operates, does that make the kept quiet for legal reasons claim more believable? Or does it actually undercut the idea that this one story is uniquely dramatic compared to everything else he stayed quiet about? What's missing from this story? Let's be straightforward about the gaps here. There's no verified quote from Tyler using the words most evil person. There's no confirmed identity for who this client supposedly was. There's no second source, no entertainment outlet, no other interview, no social media post from Tyler himself, corroborating the claim beyond the one video currently driving the conversation. That matters because a lot of celebrity gossip content gets built this way. A dramatic title gets attached to a vague or thin premise, and from there the internet fills in the blanks. Sometimes there's a real story underneath. Sometimes there isn't much there at all. Right now, with just one source making the claim and no independent confirmation, this falls into wait-and-see territory rather than confirmed fact. It's also fair to point out that Henry has a long history of being asked directly about difficult or skeptical clients in real interviews, and in every documented case we could find, his answers stay general. He talks about discretion, about the emotional weight of certain sessions, about clients who needed convincing. He doesn't single anyone out as uniquely evil. That doesn't prove the current rumor is false, but it does mean the claim doesn't match the pattern of how he's actually talked about his work in every interview that's actually on the record. So should this story be treated as breaking news, or as one creator's claim that hasn't been verified anywhere else yet? So here's where we actually land. Tyler Henry has had real documented tense moments on camera, plenty of real controversy around his legitimacy, a genuinely mixed track record of hits and misses, and he's been open about being careful with what he reveals about celebrity clients. But the specific claim about a most evil person from a secret 2017 reading is, right now, unverified and resting on a single source. We're not saying it's false. We're saying it hasn't been confirmed. And that distinction matters, especially with a career that already has plenty of real, source drama without needing to invent more. If you want us to keep tracking this story and let you know the moment anything more solid comes out, hit subscribe so you don't miss the update. And let us know in the comments. Do you think there's something real buried in here, or is this just another internet rumor running ahead of the facts?